I'm going to introduce our lovely panelists that we have on here today. So we have Eunice Musime, who is the Executive Director of Akina Mama wa Africa, based in Uganda. Akina Mama wa Africa is a Pan-African international development organization that specializes in feminist leadership development, feminist research, and advocacy as well. And this year, we are very excited to have Eunice here because Akina Mama wa Africa is celebrating its 20th year in capacity building and training regarding feminist leadership. And we also have Professor Stella Nkomo with us. Stella Nkomo is a professor in the Department of Human Resources Management at the University of Pretoria and the president of the African Academy of Management. Nkomo is also noted as a noted scholar and is coming from our subject matter expert university. She's from the University of Pretoria, and she is also a consultant in areas of leadership and change, diversified workforces, and women and leadership. And we also have Maureen Go. And Maureen Go is the head of human resources at the International Rescue Committee in Zimbabwe. She's also a notable leader in gender equality programs with an emphasis on leadership development, change management, and organizational training. Now we have an array of skills with us. We have people who specialize in feminist leadership training. We have people who have worked with diversified workforces and, during a time like COVID-19, where everything is really about changing the workforce, the future of work, understanding how women in leadership can still lead while some of us work from home, while others also have to deal with their workspaces through the digital era, through digital means. And so also with the head of human resources, we get to speak about management, what that means, change management, changing for gender equity. I mean, we are trying to start and initiate the first cohort of gender equality change makers. And what better than to have this conversation here? So I would like to start with Maureen. Maureen, if you could give us your contribution. Each contribution is 8 to 10 minutes long. I'll have Maureen, and then I'll have Professor Stella Nkomo, and then Eunice Musime. I think because we're celebrating the 20th year in feminist leadership training, and Digital Frontiers is an organization about digital capacity building. We even use the audit tool in our frameworks for gender equality in our courses. So I'd like you to just share a bit about that and how that's useful in workspaces. So I'm gonna hand over to you, Maureen.
So as already been mentioned, my name is Maureen. I am the head of human resources at the International Rescue Committee, as well as a gender equality representative for East Africa. So today, for today's session, I have been requested by the organizers of this event to present on leadership and gender in the workplace in 10 minutes, as Mbali has already mentioned. So, and before we get started, I would like to just acknowledge the various authors that I made reference to in my presentation, and we will jump straight into it. Okay. Moving on. Right, so as I was thinking about my own definition of gender diversity and inclusion, I realized that there's really an opportunity to let go of trying to define what diversity means and recognize it for what it is. So what is it? To me, diversity and inclusion is about gender. It's about race and other representation in the workforce. So it is about having the right set of skills and leadership competencies to manage and lead diverse and complex organizations. Our global economy requires that we embrace and a broader perspective about the knowledge and tools that are needed to drive success in our organizations on that larger stage. And yes, diversity is about the bottom line, about measuring impact, demonstrating performance, and result linkages is what every good business discipline does. Overall, I would like to believe that diversity and inclusion is about how we attract, how we develop and retain the best talent, regardless of the package it's in. So looking at how we can effectively engage and leverage inclusion of that talent to drive high performance and translate that performance into outstanding client service and results for our organizations. I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so recently I was reading an article addressing the state of diversity and inclusion, the space. One of the observations that was stated there was that there has been tremendous strides made in promoting the business case for diversity and inclusion while creating greater awareness about, the importance of it as essential for success in an organization. So the paper also presented some perspectives on some leadership mindsets that can lead to greater equity in the workplace. I wanted us to just look at these in detail. So we have purposeful leadership. So what leaders say and what they do about gender equality is the most critical factor in whether their organization succeed or fail in its gender diversity and inclusion efforts. People take their cues from their leaders, observing their behaviors to determine how much of a priority inclusion really is for them, and noting any inconsistencies between their actions and their words. So this is why it's very critical that leaders, starting from the top team, are aligned with the objectives of their organization's diversity and inclusion strategy and are committed and prepared to lead this change. So as role models and change agencies, they must talk authentically about why diversity and inclusion matters to them, why it is a strategic business imperative, and how it links to the organization's purpose. They must be able to communicate that sense of purpose to dedicated believers and skeptical challengers alike. Let's move on to personal change. Leaders must make some personal behavior changes that are necessary to become fully inclusive, right? So they must address some personal blind spots as well as shift their mindsets. Most often we see that leaders need to improve their ability to connect with employees and potential employees alike, truly valuing individual differences. So this means appreciating the full range of an individual's unique experiences and therefore their potential to contribute to the workplace. So once leaders do this, the next step would be to learn to create an environment where everyone feels that they belong. This leadership capability is very critical for building an inclusive culture. However, effectively building inclusive mindsets and behaviors takes time and often gets overlooked in the rush for concrete actions and quick quantifiable results. Let's look at broad engagement. So creating a sense of belonging for all, knowing how to bring people along the journey. When people thrive, businesses thrive. So in an inclusive environment, people feel valued, they feel respected and supported. So this allows them to feel a stronger sense of connection and the positive emotion that comes with it, an emotion of belonging. So one result from that is a deeper sense of engagement. So people feel passionate about their jobs and they're committed to delivering their best work. Research has shown that companies that create an environment where all voices can be heard are 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile and 8 times more likely to achieve business outcomes. So my last point is on systemic alignment. So for inclusion to be sustainable, it must become embedded into an organization's systems. We're looking at processes, policies. Companies must review each and remove any biases that may be holding certain employee groups back or resulting in different systematic outcomes for different groups. So leaders need to do this work across all the HR touch points, including hiring, performance management, promotions, rewards, etc. I'll move on to my next slide. Okay, so now let's look at some of the barriers, right? So some of the barriers to gender equity. Did I move too fast? There was another slide that I didn't. Yes, there we go. So let's look at some of the practical steps that leaders can take to implement some policies that promote gender equity in the workplace, right? So leaders need to be champions on gender issues, right? So being a champion, a gender champion, includes being supportive of and taking on an active role in gender initiatives. So communicating in a gender sensitive manner. So an effective leader sets the tone for the direction and the work of their organization. So as a leader, you should ensure that your messaging is consistent across all the platforms and audiences, particularly when it comes to your organization's gender equity objectives. Then promoting gender balance and diversity. So this is continuously now seeking to increase equal representation of women and men as part of work teams, as part of committees within the larger organization, as well as greater representation from diverse groups. You also need to consider gender-specific initiatives, right? So an effective leader recognizes women's and men's different needs and experiences and seeks to ensure that these do not put either, and women in particular, at a disadvantage. My last point on this is challenging discriminatory practices, right? So this includes challenging workplace practices to make them more gender sensitive. Okay, let's move on to my next slide. Yes, so here we're now looking at the barriers to gender equity. What are some of these barriers? So these include lack of access to important informal networks, for example. So it can be the golf course, it can be sporting events, it can be just the simple after work drinks, right? Institutional mindsets. So we're looking at the various types of gender biases and stereotyping. For example, when someone holds a belief or a stereotype about a group that are inconsistent with the behavior thought to be necessary to succeed in a specific role. So say, for example, a woman, right, can be a very effective military leader, but she may not get support because she's in a role that is considered to be incongruent with femininity, right? So there are many examples there. Individual mindsets, the thoughts and the behaviors that women might have that actually hold them back. Data show that most women reach the director level and stay there or self-select out of the workforce. The majority of women do not pursue president positions, vice president positions, or C-level positions. So this can be for numerous reasons, including socialization pressures, lack of confidence, or just a desire to avoid politics. Let's move on to my last point on lifestyle choices. So this includes work-life balance, family choices, breadwinner, caregiver priorities. So these choices are not negative, but they are considered barriers because they contribute to the leadership gender gap. Moving on. What are some of the opportunities that are there for solutions? So number one, on overcoming structural barriers. So this can be done with mentors and sponsors, but it is important to understand the difference between these two. So a mentor is a person who helps to guide and to advise someone to grow in their current position. And a sponsor, on the other hand, is a person who serves as someone's advocate to help them move towards their next position. Number two, changing institutional mindsets. So institutional mindsets actually are the most significant barrier and are a major reason that we don't see more women at the top levels of leadership. People make assumptions about women at work and as leaders based on their stereotypical roles in society. And so often women are limited in their advancement, or worse, never even given an opportunity because of bias. So one solution is for women to begin to proactively and consistently communicate your desire to advance, communicate your desire, to take on new assignments, to travel. So this type of communication will help put to rest any assumptions that are made about women. Changing individual mindsets, how can we do that? So I can give an example here here, one example of individual mindsets or limitations is office housework. So women frequently volunteer for office housework, which is time consuming and often isn't recognized. So one solution from me for women is not to volunteer for this type of activities every time, right? So accommodating lifestyle choices, seeking employers that value, employers that promote work-life balance and offer flexible options for women. Moving on to my last slide, hopefully I still have a minute or two to just finalize. We've come to the end now. So a number of questions were raised by the summit organizers. And so my presentation today sought to address those questions. I've talked about the meaning of gender diversity and inclusion and looked at some of the leadership mindsets that can lead to greater equity in the workplace, some barriers to gender equity. Then I concluded by giving you some solutions. So I will stop here and hand over to Mbali. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moline. That was really comprehensive. And there's a question here that says, when trying to create gender equity, some people may think that leadership is trying to raise the other gender. But you just showed us that there's so many different mindsets and so many things a leader can be. The question looks at how can leadership ensure that gender with the upper hand does not feel like it's targeted. So this is often something that we get asked as gender specialists, that you need to deal with the other genders that exist in organizations, and they also need to change their mindsets. They also need to see women as equal contributors, to the workspace. And thank you so much for a contribution like that. I'm going to ask Stella Gomo, please, if you could give us your contribution.
Unmute and turn on my video. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Bali. Thank you, Maureen. And thank you, everyone out there who's on this live stream. And hopefully we'll have a valuable contribution to make to you in understanding gender and leadership. I think you will find a lot of synergy in what I have to say with what Maureen has just presented. I don't have a slide presentation. I want to make 3 observations about the general question of gender diversity in leadership. And I should say, in terms of my background, I'm probably the oldest member of this panel, which is fine, but I have been looking at issues of gender and diversity for over 40 years. So I want to kind of give you a kind of a global overview. So when I get to my recommendations, you'll understand how I think about this issue, because it's important to look at the trend, to look longitudinally and not just take a snapshot. So I want to make 3 points. My first point is that, yes, the number of women in leadership and management roles is gradually improving. It is getting better. Not at the pace we probably should be at, but I must say change is taking place. That said, the change is uneven across the globe. So some parts of the globe are doing better than other parts. For example, the Scandinavian countries do better than countries in North America and Europe. The good news about Africa, Africa is somewhere in the middle, but in the last 20 years, Africa has made good progress. The progress is not also even across sectors. Women tend to do better in sectors like retail, what I call relationship sectors. They do worse in more technical industries and areas. They do better, particularly in Africa. They do better in political leadership. So for example, in South Africa, women are doing well in government positions and positions in state-owned enterprises. And the last thing is that The progress is not even across race and ethnicity. So if you look at Black women, African women, when you add race to gender, that becomes another factor, a combined factor that slows down the progress of women across the globe. So where are we today? If we took a snapshot today, I looked at the World Economic Forum 2021 report. Let me just share some numbers with you. Here's the bad news. They say it will take another 135 years to close the gender gap between men and women. In terms of the percentage of women in leadership positions, especially senior leadership, the needle gets stuck somewhere in the 20% range. So for example, in 2011, it was about 21%. Today, it's only moved to 27%. So that is my point. We're making progress, but at a snail's pace, given the number of women who are part of the populations of all countries and women's own ambitions. If you look at globally in terms of the political arena, there are 35,000 parliament seats that were surveyed by the World Economic Forum. 26% of those are held by women. If you look at ministers, there's 3,400 ministers in 156 countries. 22% are women. It's just, there's something about being stuck in the 20s, and we have a long way to go before we get to parity. Now, in terms of industry, and this will be very relevant to the audience here in terms of digital space, women have a very low presence in IT and computer-related industries. For example, cloud computing. Only 14% of those in cloud computing are women. In engineering, only 20% are women. And in the big thing that's developing now, data analytics and AI, women are only 32% of that. So we have to worry about the intersection of a gender and digital divide as we sit here in the pandemic, where we're putting more emphasis on digital and working virtually. Women are not represented well in those industries. And we can talk about that because I think that's going to have a lot to do with the future of work. So the picture is basically that women are increasing their presence in leadership, but it is at a gradual pace. Now, why is that? Well, we know it's not because women are not well educated. In fact, many women are very well educated. They have the qualifications. And contrary to what people think, many women have high aspirations to be in leadership, but often the positions they get don't match their aspirations. So it's kind of a chicken and egg. You can go into the workplace thinking, I have a chance. I can be a manager. I can be a leader. But that, as Maureen talked about, that climate, the culture, being passed over for promotions, your qualifications not being recognized, this discourages women in many respects.
Sorry, Dr. Stella Ngoma. Sorry, yes. Doctor. So we have 8 minutes left of the panel. So I would love Eunice to contribute before the session ends. And I think that's a great point to leave off the discussion. You gave us some solutions, you gave us some trends, you also gave us many stats that are very alerting, especially about the industry of the digital era. And I think for the future of work, that's definitely something we should consider. There's another question that's come up. So how come women are up there are not pulling other women to join them as well? Or is this an issue of women are their own enemies? If you could please answer that for us, Dr. Stella Nkomo?
Sure. This is a question you often hear. I think it has two dynamics that we need to understand. You know, first of all, what positions are the women in and how much power they have. So even though women get in powerful positions, if they're a solo, they have a certain amount of insecurity. So some of it is literally not using the power that they have, right? And so women need to learn to use the power that they have to sponsor and advocate. But in fact, one of my colleagues did a research study to show that women who advocate for diversity and inclusion, they end up getting punished often in their organizations, or they get pushed back. I think it's very important that we as women form solidarity. We need to work together. And so when we get a seat at the table, we must use that power, and we must not be afraid to use it. And so, and the other thing that about organizations, the reason why women compete so much, this is my view, is that if they look at a company and they see that the company tends to have what I call the woman's position, it's always filled by a woman. It's normally just one position. So people do understand I'm in competition with other women for that position. So it makes us act negatively. So we have a lot of work to do as women to form solidarity and to be advocates for inclusion, not just of women, but inclusion for other groups that are also excluded.
Thank you for that. So I'm gonna ask Eunice, is your sound back on?
That's terrible.
Well, that's terrible. We would have loved to have your contribution. And I know you had an entire slide planned out. Maybe if you're able to share your slides with us. I don't know, we'd have to maybe publish it in a different form. But we do have 4 minutes left. I just want to wrap up and just thank you for your participation. I want to thank you for your contribution, and you know, there's some threads that I'd like to leave the audience with. You know, there's so much happening in terms of gender leadership that we need to take into consideration how to build solidarities. We also need to challenge our mindsets. We need to look at mindsets that are transforming the actual environments that we work in, as opposed to, you know, using mindsets that have blind spots and that also oppress others within the same workspaces that we're in. There was also a conversation about, you know, the gaps between opportunities and resources when it comes to women, and especially when we're in leadership positions. We are making progress in terms of women in leadership, and Dr. Stella Nkomo's discussion was showing us globally what those advancements are. And I just want to thank you for illuminating some of those stats and showing us that, you know, the Scandinavians are ahead, but Africa is not going backward. This is not backward, actually. It is actually accelerating forward, just not at the pace that we would like it to accelerate forward but we know that there's work to do. And this is the type of work we're trying to do by having, you know, these conversations, especially at Pathway to 17, where we're tracking progress, we're tracking patterns, we're tracking where we are as a continent. And so as a continent, we really need to consider what skills we can apply together. And this is a solidarity that we definitely need. We definitely need a solidarity that brings in skills. And Eunice was going to speak about a little bit about the tools that Akina Mama has developed for feminist leadership. And feminist leadership is a leadership that recognizes power and imbalance. So really, I think if we could use those tools, and we could also expand what we read on in terms of diversity and gender and inclusion. So I'm going to wrap that up. Thank you so much for coming to our panel. And I hope you come to the other panels. We just want to leave it there. The other panels are on tomorrow around gender equity, and we love your participation there. Thank you so much, everyone.